Now, Mark Brennae on CFAX 1070.
Last Friday, BC Supreme Court Justice Catherine Bruce ruled two convicted terrorists weren't really terrorists at all. Rather, she said John Nuttall and Amanda Korody were naive. They talked a big game, but had absolutely no ability to carry out a terrorist act. I want to read you something that she wrote in her ruling. This is about Nuttall. She confirmed that Nuttall, hold on a second. The police undercover team sent in to monitor the couple had evidence that, quote, confirmed Mr. Nuttall's general ineptitude, his scatterbrained character, his inability to think logically, his childlike demeanor, and his inability to remain focused on a task which would be essential to the articulation and execution of a terrorist plot. That's what they found. That's a quote from the ruling. Does that sound like a terrorist to you? What's the connection between what the RCMP did and what they were told to do? Was it a connection to Bill C-51, the anti-terror bill? Let's find out more. Laurel Collins is an instructor of social justice studies at UVic. Hello, Laurel.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. Right off the top, a lot of people are making that connection. Bill C-51 and the whole idea of getting these two young people to try to potentially, I suspect, blow up the legislature. Do you find there is a connection?
I think there's actually a number of connections. And on the one hand, there's a connection in terms of, it was 2013, this is before Bill C-51 happened, and at the time, the police, and they continue to have these, they have performance indicators or targets when it comes to actually addressing terrorist threats. And so for 2014, 2015, they had a target of 6. So they wanted to prevent, detect, deny, or respond to at least 6 terrorist threats. And so really, we want to put the Nuttall and Korody verdict within that framework where police are actually looking to have a response to terrorist threats, and they want to be showing that they'll actually address terrorism in order to receive increased counterterrorism funding.
It's almost like a quota system.
A little bit. They do have these performance indicators that they want to meet. And so I want us to think about it in relation to Bill C-51 in that way. The Harper government was really looking for reasons to justify this kind of legislation. But I also want us to look at the connection in terms of how they are now continuing to be affected by Bill C-51, which means right now, they were released, and then within a few hours they were arrested again and put on a terrorism peace bond. And the language in Bill C-51 actually shifted the kind of burden of proof, or the vague language changed from that people actually will commit a terrorist offense to may commit, which makes it much easier for the RCMP and for CSIS to actually acquire these peace bonds.
Now, this was 2013. The the alleged plot went down, Canada Day. Coincidentally, these two people didn't know what Canada Day was, apparently. So that's
or at
what
least when it was. They thought it was June.
They thought it was a month earlier. So that's what we're dealing with. If they had been arrested, and we fast forwarded 2 years from now, and this happened this Canada Day, under today's law, they probably would have been convicted, correct?
Well, they were actually, a jury found them guilty.
Right.
And then the judge found the entrapment meant that there needs to be a stay on those proceedings. And that's actually a very drastic, unusual thing to happen.
It's the first time.
Absolutely. First time in Canada. And she actually said within her response that this is drastic, that the stay on proceedings is necessary in order for this kind of the proceedings of justice to carry out.
No, I'm picking up what you're putting down. But my point is that if this were to have happened under today's law, they would have been convicted, and there would have been no entrapment involved. It would have been, that's it, throw away the key.
I would actually argue that on the one hand, yes, you're correct, because what they were doing initially was one of the reasons that you can argue entrapment is that they were just speaking these terrorist threats. They were just
to say something is one thing.
Exactly. However, after Bill C-51, actually advocating and promoting terrorism is a criminal offense. We actually have a new speech crime under Bill C-51. So yes, they would have been able to be convicted under that. However, another part of this entrapment case is that the police actually created this plot. And so I would argue that on the one hand, under Bill C-51, they would have fallen under the speech crime, but the police still went above and beyond in creating the terrorist plot. Really, John Nuttall and Amanda Korody were their pawns in this almost media stunt.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So that under the way the law is written and is now passed, because they were speaking of doing this, that would have been enough in itself to convict them. Now, had the police continued to do what they had done, but it's arguable whether they would have had to at that point. But had they have, well, perhaps, yeah, the entrapment laws would still have come into play.
Precisely.
But maybe they wouldn't have gone so far because they wouldn't have had to.
Absolutely. And
that's a lot of maybes, I realize.
Absolutely.
But that's logical.
And we want to stress that these are marginalized individuals. They're recovering from heroin addiction. They're living in poverty in a basement apartment, hardly leaving other than with this undercover agent. So I really want to stress how Bill C-51 comes into play here, and gross police misconduct also comes into play. And part of that is this culture that has arisen out of the legacy of the Harper government, where police, the RCMP and the intelligence services think that they can go to any measure in order to address these so-called threats. And really, I want to reiterate that in Canada, we are more likely to be killed by a moose than by a terrorist. Good
thing Harper's still not in, because he would have anti-moose legislation up the yin-yang,
right
especially
away.
out here in BC and Alberta.
And yet, with our new government, we haven't seen a lot of changes. To be honest, the Liberals promised swift, that was their wording, swift changes and amendments repealing the most problematic aspects of Bill C-51, and we haven't seen a single amendment. And they promised consultation. None of that broad public consultation has happened. The only change that they've made is this parliamentary oversight, which is really a timid kind of oversight structure that has a parliamentary committee report to the Prime Minister, and he can censor or do with however he wants the report that they give him. It's not actually a report that goes to our parliament or to the public.
I was going to ask you about that. Is it disappointing? I mean, I know the Prime Minister, and he's only been in power for a few months now, but still, there's many files that he had promised. It looks like they're starting to work on the marijuana. Today, the announcement of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, that inquiry, that was announced. There's a few things he's been moving on. Site C yesterday, that's another ball of wax. But no movement whatsoever on Bill C-51. He brought it in, he endorsed it, and he promised that we would look at it and open up any problems with it and change it, and yet not a peep. Do you think this is the beginning of the end of Bill C-51 as far as being looked at again? It's just going to stay? Or do you think they will go and look at it?
To be honest, I actually think there is a resurgence of interest in this topic.
Yeah.
And so the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association have relaunched their campaign to repeal the most problematic aspects of Bill C-51, and also talk about how to increase oversight. So how to increase civilian review, increase funding for CERC, which is the kind of oversight after the fact oversight, but also to increase real-time oversight. And so campaigns like that starting up again. Our local MP from Esquimalt Sandwich Souk, Randall Garrison, just announced that he's planning to introduce a private member's bill asking to repeal the problematic aspects of Bill C-51. And so there is a kind of renewed momentum around this, and I do think that it will gain some traction, especially with the Liberal government not following through on its promises.
Okay, when we come back, Laurel Collins is our guest. She's an instructor of social justice and studies at University of Victoria. I want to ask you about the nitpicky parts that bother you about Bill C-51 and why our audience should be concerned about Bill C-51, because it has been a while. This was a big topic months ago, and it's kind of fallen by the wayside. But here comes that sound. And here is Hilary Eastmuir.
Thanks, Mark. A couple stories that we're working on here in the newsroom. Patients with MS living here in Victoria speaking out about a recent announcement by the MS Society of Canada that it's going to be cutting services. Crown Council has decided not to approve charges in the death of a Victoria man on the Songhees Reserve, and a Saskatchewan man has been charged with uttering threats against the Prime Minister. Turning now to the roads this hour, it's starting to look pretty busy out there, especially on the Trans-Canada Highway. Still seeing northbound delays backed up from around the entrance to Goldstream Provincial Park to Millstream Road. Still no accidents in that area. It's just the sheer number of cars on the roads. And seeing some delays on West Coast Road around the Whiffen-Spit Road area. Looks like traffic is still reduced to one lane through that area, so expect delays. And checking the ferries this hour. From Swartz Bay to Tsawwassen, there's still room on the 4 p.m. sailing. If you do spot an accident out there, you can call us anytime at star 1070.
Thank you, Hillary. What's a Whiffen? Whiffen-Spit Road. 250-386-1161. Give us a call. Tell Corey. He'll tell me. I don't know what a Whiffen is, but the Whiffen-Spit Road. Thank you. I just think it's a great name. When we come back, was passing Bill C-51, the Conservative government's anti-terror bill, really behind the whole BC legislature bombing episode? We'll talk about that more with Laurel Collins when we return.
Afternoons with Mark Brennae is brought to you by
Fairway Market. No club cards, no points, no gimmicks. Just great card-free pricing at Fairway Market.
As the temperature has heated up, so has the Lions offense.
Jennings takes the handoff, throws end zone touchdown, Brian Burnham.
Now hungry for another win, the Leos look to make smoked meat out of Montreal.
Trail Appliances BC Lions football.
Lions, Alouettes, kickoff at 4 tomorrow on the Lions Radio Network.
Brought to you by Trail Appliances. Your home, your style. Discover thousands of appliances now at trailappliances.com.
You might have a vision for what you'd like your next renovation to be, but do you really know what's available? At Low Key Tiling, their knowledgeable staff will assist you through your renovation planning process and show you options you didn't know existed. Whether you're a do-it-yourselfer looking to explore the vast amount of products available or a contractor seeking the highest quality building materials, Low Key Tiling can guide you through the process.
Design in your world, live in ours. Low Key Tiling on Alpha just off Douglas.
A shared passion for power, performance, and innovative techniques? That's Integrity Sales in Husqvarna. As a Husqvarna dealer, Integrity Sales carries all Husqvarna power equipment. From brush cutters, weed eaters, chainsaws, lawnmowers, lawn tractors, to a full line of parts and accessories. Count on Integrity Sales to keep you working efficiently with the power of Husqvarna. Integrity Sales, your Greater Victoria authorized Husqvarna dealer. 2180 Keating Cross Road, where the professionals shop.
Tonight at 6 on CTV News.
Fire crews descend on the Campbell River area after a wildfire doubles in size near Roberts Lake. Record Victoria home sales in July, but inventory on the market the lowest ever. We'll speak to someone who'd like to sell, but fears she'll be stuck with nowhere to go. And an explosive visit to the DND's underwater demolition range in Metchosin.
If it's happening on Vancouver Island, it's on CTV News weeknights at 5 and 6 on Channel 12. You're listening to Mark Brennae on CFAX 1070.
Okay, Bill C-51 is going to rear its ugly head again at some point soon, and we probably want that because there's a lot of things about Bill C-51 which is passed and is in the books that should frighten us. And let's talk about that. Laurel Collins is a UVic instructor of social justice and studies. Thanks for coming in, Laurel. What are the big things about Bill C-51 that concern you?
You know, there are so many problems in this bill. It's not only that it is, threatening our civil liberties, but it's also that it's ineffective when combating terrorism. Mm-hmm. And so I want us to keep that in mind. But just a few of the top things is the vague language in the bill. So it talks about terrorism in general. That's actually written into it. Terrorism in general, which legally in a piece of legislation is very hard to interpret, very vague. Also, the fact that they lump in a number of things in with terrorism, including threats to critical infrastructure, right, threats to the economic security of Canada. And so what I want you to think about there is critical infrastructure includes pipelines, it includes kind of fracking and LNG facilities, it includes when we're talking about threats to the economic security of Canada, we could be talking about union strikes, wildcat strikes, that kind of thing. So when you lump all of those things in with terrorism, it becomes very problematic. It puts Indigenous communities who are fighting against pipelines on their territories, or environmental activists, other activists, potentially into this category of terrorism.
Activists that are opposed to Site C as an example, or to one of the many pipelines for an example. They could be under the terrorist umbrella.
Exactly, because it's this new umbrella of threats to Canadian security, which includes threats to critical infrastructure. And interestingly enough, we were talking a little bit about these targets or performance indicators. The RCMP also has performance indicators about reports that they're sending to private sector parties or other partners. And so they have a number of reports that they need to send out to to keep people abreast of these threats to critical infrastructure.
Right.
And in 2014, 2015, their target was 200, but they actually sent out over 800. And I don't know if you remember, around the same time of Bill C-51, there was a leaked document, a leaked RCMP document that discussed the language they used was violent Aboriginal extremists and anti-petroleum extremists when referring to people who are fighting against pipelines and other things that might impact the petroleum industry.
Right.
And they were sending this document to the petroleum industry. So I think I want us to see this as not only a problem with Bill C-51 and the specific language, but also a problem with the kind of security culture that is building and built over the course of the Harper government, and is now continuing in this Liberal government. So a few other problems in the actual bill itself is that it created a speech crime. So we're talking about promoting or advocating terrorism in general, what that means. We never had a speech crime like this before.
So this goes back to Nuttall and Korody,
absolutely,
who would have been convicted under this part of Bill C-51 because they were very vocal about the fact that they were supporting Palestine, and they were all upset about what's going on in the Middle East.
Precisely. Some other problematic aspects of the bill is the no-fly list, and so we've seen in the U.S. the problems that they've had with their no-fly list. Tons of people being put on, even in Canada. I think there was a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old who were put on this no-fly list as threats to...
Well, to be fair, the kid had a pea shooter. Come on.
But one of the biggest problems is the lack of oversight. And the Harper government actually cut funding to CERC and continued to roll back oversight. And the oversight that was happening was already inadequate, and then you give CSIS, our intelligence security service, more powers, powers to detain, powers to disrupt, vague powers to disrupt. We don't actually know what that means.
Right.
Turning them from an information gathering agency to a kind of police force, a kind of disruption force. And so when you increase their powers, but you're rolling back the oversight, you're taking away the oversight, it becomes very problematic. And you can see that in the Nuttall and Korody case, where if we don't have oversight over these bodies, this kind of abuse of process is very possible, and we might not catch it.
How will ongoing and future terror investigations be affected by the entrapment ruling last week?
It's an interesting question. On the one hand, the judge was quite explicit in saying that this won't apply to all terror proceedings going forward, because it's a unique case of entrapment and abuse of process. And so ideally, we hope that it would have an effect on the police force, that they would kind of see the error of their ways, apologize. Unfortunately, that's not actually the way it's going. The police, after the Nuttall and Korody were released, they released a statement, asking the public to be vigilant. The Crown is actually going to appeal
They've already said they're going to appeal, yeah.
Absolutely. And then, within a few hours, they arrested Nuttall and Korody again on this peace bond. They have to go back to court on September 7th. And so I don't actually see the police or the Crown kind of going in the direction where let's learn from the mistakes that we've made, which is unfortunate. That would be my hope where it would go. And when it comes to kind of what this means going forward for future terror cases, I do think that there are some lessons to be learned. And one of them is about the information sharing that's happening between the police, the RCMP, and CSIS. In this case, there wasn't actually a lot of information sharing, and Bill C-51 increases information sharing, but it does it in a way that is irresponsible. It information shares between 17 different agencies, including the Canada Revenue Agency, the Border Security Services, the RCMP. And it's this kind of mass data, where what we actually would like to see is CSIS and the RCMP working together to actually, one of them saying, we're realizing that Nuttall and Korody aren't actually a threat.
Right.
We have information saying that, no, they're, marginalized.
Yeah, because by June of 2013, I read that quote from the ruling. They realized that these people were not a threat. We're down to just a few minutes left. We got a bunch of calls, and I'm sorry not to get to you, but is it Sylvia that was online first? Sylvia, we can get to yours. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Some very excellent points. Bill C-51 has got to be looked into as soon as possible, and Canadians must wake up before it's too late. It's an all-encompassing blanket type of law that any Canadian could be arrested under. And politics and police shouldn't be mixed. That's a toxic mixture. There shouldn't be quotas that are set and the police try and meet them. And I am really troubled by the fact that we haven't heard one word from the commanding officer of the RCMP in BC, nor the commissioner in Ottawa. Dead silence. And I'll leave it at that.
Good points. Thanks for your call, Sylvia. What the RCMP has said on the record is that they will continue to study the ruling and will comment at an appropriate time. Dave, we got time for about 10 seconds. I apologize, but go ahead and make your point.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask, next to CSIS, did not Harper government, or there's a branch of CSIS, I don't know what it's called, CSAT or something, or they're responsible kind of like with Homeland Security. Is that correct?
That I don't know. We'll take a look into it.
If you could.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Appreciate that you listened. Does that ring a bell? I know there's so many. There's several agencies I've never even heard of here. CSIS was the one I grew up with.
Absolutely. CSIS, most people actually hadn't heard of CSIS before Bill C-51.
Well, I lived in Ottawa, so and CSIS was just down the road, actually.
And CERC is their oversight, kind of after-the-fact oversight. I haven't heard of the thing just mentioned by our caller, but I will
we'll look
it
into
up.
it next time you're on. Which will be soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming in. Laurel Collins, an instructor of social justice studies at the University of Victoria. News time next, but when we come back, we're going to talk into the Trudeau government again. It's changed the way the Supreme Court of Canada will select its judges. Well, it doesn't select it, the Prime Minister selects it, but the whole process has changed.
This is the Lions Huddle, brought to you by your BC Ram dealers.
Well, some remain focused on the two late interceptions thrown by Jonathan Jennings against Calgary. The Lions' sophomore pivot is not among them.
It's over now. I can't do anything about it, so all I can do is go to Montreal and try to do better in that game and try to lead this team to some victories and continue to help this team win.
And there's evidence to suggest Jennings will do just that. Only once in his young career has he lost back-to-back starts, and he followed his last defeat with his most productive passing game to date. In fact, Jennings has passed for over 800 yards and 6 touchdowns in his last 2 games, while rushing for 74 yards and a pair of scores. Focus on his mistakes if you want to, but you'll miss what is becoming a pretty impressive big picture. I'm Scott Rintoul, and that's The Huddle.
The Lions Huddle, brought to you by your BC Ram dealers.
Home to Ram 1500, Canada's most fuel-efficient truck ever. Right now, get 0% financing for 84 months. See dealer for details.
This is a game of ping pong. This is a game of Lions football. This is a game of ping pong in the middle of a game of Lions football. BC Lions football. When it comes to games, there's no contest. Brought to you by your BC Ram dealers.
Discover the inspiring true story.
We're going to make a recording.
Do you want to try another take?
That seemed perfect.
Of the world's worst singer.
It defies medical science.
Academy Award winner Meryl Streep, Golden Globe winner Hugh Grant.
Singing at Carnegie